Just to say, it's hybrid as usual, so people will be some people are in the council chamber to make sure that we're properly quorate, others obviously remote. Please mute yourselves when you're not speaking. Please raise a hand when you want to speak, and I'll do my best to sit as we look through the screens, and only use the chat function if the IT is starting to fail. Otherwise, we'd like to hear from you personally. We've got 1 or 2 people in attendance, to say, in the room. Myself, Mayor Glanville, Chris Kennedy, a number of the other councillors. I won't actually name everybody because that would be slightly silly. So we've got a number of guests. Andrew Monk is deputising for Stephen Haynes. Rory McCallum's joining us, and Mark Carroll, CEO of the local authority, is joining us in an honorary attendee capacity as well. Apologies for absence. In addition to Stephen Haynes, we've got Francis Haste, Paul Calaminas, for whom Lorraine Sanduza, thank you very much, is substituting. Any declarations of interest in relation to any of the items today? Mayor Glanville.
No, but we've left, oh no, Raj is in both links. Sorry, I thought we'd left him behind. I can see him up here, but he's also in the old link. Sorry, Chair.
Good, okay, so meeting. Anybody have any comments or corrections to make on those? No, not a few shakes to the head, so I can accept those as a true record of the meeting. Thank you very much. And you'll note also there were a couple of addendums. One was the written answer to the question at the meeting last month on the low traffic neighbourhoods, and also a response to the letter that Healthwatch Hackney sent to myself regarding issues around COVID-19 and vaccination. So they're all there for the record. So in terms of the action log, moving on swiftly, you'll see there are 7 actions there. They're pretty self-explanatory in terms of the notes. Some are continuing action. We'll be hearing more from Healthwatch during the course of the meeting today. There's an update on action little number 6 there, which has been closed. That's been subsequently closed since this note on my meeting notes here was written. I should say there are 3 obviously actions which relate to the work of Connect Hackney. And we had a long and really interesting discussion last time about that. I suppose it's just important to say that I know there's an awful lot of work going on outside of the meeting now as a result of those discussions, picking up many of the issues that were aired at that meeting then. So just to note that's positive work in progress, and action 7 is also closed. I think unless there are any other comments about the action log. Good, we'll move on. We haven't got any questions from the public this time, so we're ready to go straight into the first substantive item, which I'll turn to Donna, Health and Wellbeing Strategy Update, which of course, well, I'll leave you to contextualize it in the basis of our previous hour's discussion in the closed meeting, but over to you, Donna.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, so we're just bringing an update to the open meeting on the progress in the health and wellbeing strategy, which has been in development for quite a while. And I'll put some context in terms of the discussion we've just had as well. But just for anybody who wasn't at that meeting, for background information, at the November 21 meeting and January 22 meetings, the Health and Wellbeing Board agreed to the 3 priorities. So that is improving mental health, increasing social connections, and supporting greater financial security in the draft strategy, and also approved the sort of suggestions for ways of working to deliver them. And the plan from that meeting was, following the public consultation, which now ended in February, that the board would discuss the draft strategy at the March meeting in a closed session, and that would be to go over the proposed amendments, the strategy, consultation feedback, and discuss how partners are going to work together to achieve progress across each of those 3 priority areas. And the discussion around the consultation update, just for those again who weren't there, we had a consultation period for 12 weeks between the 21st of November and it closed recently on the 17th of February. And during that time, we attended quite a few stakeholder and resident meetings and consulted with 370 stakeholders. and asked them about whether they agreed with the strategy priorities and proposed actions, and whether they could suggest any further actions we should be taking in relation to the 3 priorities. And finally, who should we be working together with to achieve those ambitions across the 3 priorities. The consultation received good feedback, so we had over 300 responses, and that's on top of speaking to 370 stakeholders as well, and over 100 of those were paper responses as well, so that was an interesting submission. So in total, we've spoken to over 1,400 residents and wider stakeholders during the engagement and consultation phases to help shape the strategy. And then those responses were put into the interim consultation report, which was sent to members last week. The final consultation report will be published, but it won't be ready until the end of March, as the consultation team are still working on that. As discussed in the previous session, responses have been really supportive of the strategy's suggested priorities, and there's been a huge number of suggested actions across those 3 priorities as well, and really helpful suggestions for partnerships and ways of working that should be considered in terms of successfully delivering on those priorities. And we're still sort of working our way through those and analysing them. A number of responses also highlighted key priority population health groups, population groups that we should be focusing on across those 3 strategies, across those 3 priorities. And so now that we're at the end of the consultation phase, today we had a closed session. So we before this meeting, we had a 1-hour closed session for members to sort of take stock and think about the amended strategy document, which has been sent to members and is attached in this agenda pack. Anything we're missing in terms of high-level actions that should fit into that strategy, and really consider how we're going to work together to deliver on those 3 priorities as they're described in the strategy. So that discussion just took place a minute ago, and we've got another few things that we need to sort of work on for next steps as well. So we're proposing an action planning group. So obviously there's a need for this strategy to align with all of our relevant existing work that's already going on, and we need to make sure that we've identified the gaps and capture those in the action plan as well. So that's sort of the proposed next step of this work, and we're proposing that happens from March, so this month onwards, hopefully towards developing an action plan to be launched in June, July time after the elections. And in terms of other next steps, which we've been discussing in the closed session previous to this as well, is obviously there's been a lot of work that's gone on already to take the strategy to this stage, but we do need the whole partnership now to deliver on these strategy priorities and ways of working, and really define or actions sit underneath those priorities. And we have outlined in the paper attached to the agenda pack what we think they are. So we think it's the development of the sort of co-production and engagement element of this strategy, and taking that forward into action planning, monitoring and evaluation as well. Thinking about our strategy action planning, as I just said, the strategy launch and communications on our progress, coordination of the working group or the action planning group going forward as well, making sure we've got the links in with the integrated care partnership as well, and preparing quarterly progress updates to the board, and making sure that our partners are also aware, or wider partners are also aware of the progress we're making across those priorities as well. And in terms of the discussion we've just had as well within the closed session, there's a number of good suggestions of how we work together through the partnership, in terms of embedding the strategy across our organisations, championing the strategy and supporting the strategy through our partnership organisations during the action planning and implementation phase as well. So we'll be writing that up and sending that across to members and agreeing our next steps. And I guess in terms of recommendations for this update, the board is asked to note the consultation progress, approve the strategy document if they're happy with it, We've already sort of discussed our next steps for action planning, so we'll follow up on that after the meeting, and accept the proposal of an action planning group to take forward the development of the actions. And the last bit is about appointing working group members from across the partnership organisations to take this planning forward as well. So I hope that's enough information covered, but let me know if I've missed anything.
Great, thank you, Donna. So any comments from colleagues at this stage, bearing in mind we have just spent quite a bit of time talking it through. So Mayor Glanville and then Sandra Hosmans.
Can I defer to Sandra first? Is that okay?
Yes, fine by me.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms Glanville. I suspect we were going to say the same thing anyway. I just wanted to, well, first of all, thank Donna and the team for the hard work they've put into developing the strategy, all the engagement and the consultation work that has gone on, and that really well facilitated closed session we've just had to discuss how we take it forward. The one thing I wanted to just remind everybody, though, is that although we've named these 3 priority areas around mental health, social connections, and financial security, our overarching aim is to reduce inequalities and health inequalities in particular, and that's the lens that we need to look at the strategy through, and where we need to have a very keen focus on improving mental health and reducing inequalities in mental health, etc., rather than retreating to our usual ways of doing things. And along with that, that means we need to pay particular attention to our anti-racism commitment, and apply that anti-racism and anti-discriminatory approach, and not just think about access, for instance, or reduce the idea of health inequalities to fairly sort of easy geographical or socioeconomic distribution, and say, oh, it's just because they live in this area or they need more access, but to make sure that we're considering some of the systemic issues that we need to address for ourselves and our own workforces, as well as for our residents and service users. So that was the main point I wanted to make. I suspect that the Mayor wanted to make a similar point, but I will hand over to him. Oh, but well, back to you, Chair.
Through the chair, and it was on along a similar vein, just to really highlight really what Sandra said and really welcome it, because I think for us it really does start with those health inequalities. It's the experience of the pandemic. It's what we've learned through all of our collaborative work with our communities, and I think we're on a really strong set of foundations on some of that learning, some of the strategic approaches, and I just want to really concur and agree with everything that Sandra said. This is a partnership board as well, so we had some really good discussions in the closed session. We're perhaps light on a few partners today than we are normally, so I think we just got to make sure, we recognise if we do agree the report today, it's a collective agreement of everyone on the Health and Wellbeing Board, and then the hard work really does start turning it into the action plan. I did just want to go back a step though and thank everybody that's been involved in this work. A huge energetic attempt to engage organisations and individuals across Hackney, some really eye-catching posters, use of community pharmacy, all the partners I think pulled out all of the stops. So the citizen science approach, I think we did some focus groups and workshops. I know there's a lot to crunch from our consultation team, so I thank them in advance. But what Donna has achieved, and I think us collectively, but especially the energy Donna's brought to this work with colleagues, I just think we should note and thanks. It's very easy for us in the council chamber and virtually to just sort of note and agree in 3 seconds, but there has been a huge amount of work from everyone on this call and across the system to get to this point, and the work doesn't stop when we do put our hands up and agree with as I suggested earlier. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Well said. And as you say, it's worth marking this point at this moment, isn't it? Even though a huge amount of work it lies before us to make this a real and impact in terms of improving people's lives. So, with that in mind, though, we should just acknowledge that we have noted the consultation process, but we are asked as a board to approve the strategy documents, and I want to move to sort of formally acknowledging that and agreeing that. Yes, I need nods, thumbs up. In the room, we've got plenty of, thank you very much, colleagues. The action plans setting out the next steps. I know, Donna, you're going to articulate that and write more details in that as we proceed, but we can agree in terms, I think, how you've set that out in those general terms. We're happy with that. Thank you very much, everyone. And then the action planning group, I think, is a really good proposal, and I want to move on with that. Are we happy to accept that as a sensible way forward? Thank you very much. And appoint the working group members and partner organisations to take the planning forward. Well, I don't expect that all to be nominated here and now, but actually we would undertake to respond to Donna and colleagues' requests for names in the fullness of time. Yep. Okay, nodding again. Thank you very much. So I've moved swiftly to that point because I didn't see any more hands up, but I just wanted to check that no one is wanting to say anything else before we move on to the next item. Nope. Okay, brilliant. All right, well, Donna and team, thank you very much indeed, and to everyone else who's been involved in this work, thank you. So I'm going to move now to Rory McCullum. I can see you, there you are, yes, who's going to present for 10 minutes or maybe a little more. We're slightly ahead of time. The City and Hackney Safeguarding Children Partnership Annual Report for 2020-21. Sort of 10 minutes to talk, and then we'll have sort of at least 5 minutes or so to ask you some questions, but I'll pass over to you to do your presentation. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for inviting me here today. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Rory McCallum. I'm the professional advisor for the Safeguarding Children Partnership. As Mark just introduced, this is the annual report for 2021, so it's a little bit of time away, but it's a statutory requirement that this report is published by our safeguarding partners. It's well, some of you on the call at the moment, apologies, you've probably heard what I'm about to say already in a different forum. Probably deeper apologies that you may very well need to hear it again at another forum. But the report itself is 142 pages long, so I'm sure there won't be any objections to me not going through it page by page. But I do want to pull out some of the key issues from the Safeguarding Partnerships perspective over what was an exceptionally difficult year for our frontline practitioners, our managers, and indeed our strategic leaders in trying to deal with business that was certainly not usual. The report itself this year, we've tried to structure it a little bit differently, where we can pull to the fore some of the evidence, impact, assurance, and learning. And you'll see throughout the report, we've kind of put in blocks where we think there are some really good examples of how the partnership has, risen to the challenge in certain areas, and where there are still areas for improvement in terms of practice. The report itself, there is a section in there that talks about our kind of collective response to COVID. Certainly from the partnerships perspective, there was a pivot away from our kind of usual meetings to something called contingency oversight group meetings. Those were set up to be kind of frequent, quick, but they had a clear focus on looking at workforce efficiency, patterns of risk, interoperability issues that may or may not impede our effectiveness towards safeguarding children. That pivot was also seen in how we moved to kind of a digital or digital solutions to some of the issues that we faced. From a practice perspective, we saw that through things like virtual meetings and virtual visits to families. But again, from our partnerships perspective, we also released in conjunction with the council in Hackney and in the City of London, the Safer Schools app, which is kind of an app that gave advice to parents, carers, staff, practitioners around safeguarding issues. We also used it in terms of our kind of training provision. And that's a core part of the partnership's work in terms of providing multi-agency training. Whilst we were initially anxious about what might happen over the course of the year, actually our shift to a hybrid delivery, well, a digital delivery model of training actually saw an increase in numbers, and our reach was much wider. And we still managed to deliver some high quality, good training provision to our frontline staff. I think key issues that emerged over this period, and some of these you will be very familiar with. We certainly saw a pattern of increased head injuries to young children, locally and nationally. Was a theme. The pressure cooker that was home at the time for many may have been a very sort of significant contributor in that regards. But when we think about children at home during COVID, being less visible, children not being seen, not being heard, not being helped, I think that was a challenge, again, from a national perspective. We await to see what the report on Arthur Labinjo Hughes and Star Hobson say, those two national cases that hit the headlines, but I imagine there's going to be a reflection to some of those stubborn challenges that face practitioners anyway, but with those stubborn challenges being further exacerbated by some of the restrictions brought on by the pandemic. Some of the other themes that we also saw locally, things around accidents at home. We had a couple of tragic circumstances involving sort of accidents to young people. We responded to that, and certainly we'd be mindful of continuing kind of that message around kind of safeguarding. It's not just about child protection. There are some of these things that happen to children, you know, when they're in their living room, in their bedroom, and we need to be mindful that, you know, our citizens, our families, our parents and carers are aware of those sorts of things. So really good example, I know Hackney Housing did some really good stuff on awareness raising about window safety. It sounds a simple thing, but we know that there's been some really tragic cases where children have died or been seriously harmed as a result of falling out of windows in high-rise buildings. A couple of other themes that again will be familiar, I imagine, to everyone on the call here today. You know, the rise in domestic violence and abuse calls that we're seeing certainly at the start of the pandemic, the exacerbation of mental health issues for individuals with existing mental health challenges and those who didn't have specific mental health challenges, and how that has sort of impacted particularly on kind of young people through the course of the pandemic. And again, I'm pretty sure you've had that on your agenda here before, where some of the pressures on CAM services, the pressures on young people being isolated at home, and some of the negative influences that you might find from the online world, where children have been spending more time, have added to some of those needs. So probably just the only other things that I would pull out from the report, Chair, and this is kind of a big part of it, you know, all of our annual reports is around kind of the learning and improvement that we try to accrue when we look at cases where things haven't worked as well as they should have done. And in this year's report, there were kind of three cases that were highlighted. One was some work that the partnership did on developing some key messages for practice. This was off the back of a couple of tragic events where two care leavers took their own lives. I know there's some really positive work going on around suicide and self-harm, but this was around kind of feeding into some of those practice lessons for frontline staff. There was another review, and at the time it was a serious case review. They've since changed their name. They're now called local child safeguarding practice reviews, but the SCR on child A is also referred to in the report. That was a young lad who had very sort of significant and complex health needs, and again that continues to be tracked through our case review subgroup, and the actions and the recommendations being responded to. But that's referenced, and if you haven't read that report, I'd encourage you to do so. And then lastly, there was a report on the young lad Tashawn Aird, who was tragically killed in that reporting period, and that reflects lessons around serious youth violence. Again, not an uncommon theme that I imagine again has been spoken about at this board previously. But there's also been some really good work in response to the recommendations to that review. I know Hackney Education have been doing some really solid stuff under kind of Jackie's leadership and Annie Gammon's leadership around looking at how to strengthen kind of the early help system around children who might be at risk of exclusions, which we know is a catalyst to potential additional risk. So some positive responses there, and exactly what we want to see. Lessons being identified and improvements being made. I could go on, but I think just with the timescales, Chair, it would probably be good to leave it there. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Laura, it is a really, really impressive and super thorough report, so thank you for that, and thank you. We've duly received it, thank you. We've got 3 hands up. I've got a couple of comments, but I'll wait to my turn, and I'll turn instead to Mayor Glanville.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Rory, for presenting the report. Obviously, we do see it in other places, but I think this is an important public moment at the Health and Wellbeing Board. I think there's a couple of things I would say, probably not leading towards a question, more comment. One, I think we have to pay a huge thanks to you and Jim and the team for the work that you do, and how there's a lot of unsung work around effectively supporting families, especially around the case review work. Now, that isn't alone. That will often involve social workers, Young Hackney, other members of the community. But the way that you respond to individuals and families at some of the worst moments of their lives and give them voice through these reports. There's only summaries of the case reviews here, but I know that there's a huge amount that sits behind it. And just to pay thanks for that, because I think it can be a bit unsung and it can feel a little dry once you get into a well-designed report, but it is real. I suppose there's a deep sense of sort of policy continuity leading out of some of the reviews and the reports here, and that wider work, especially around care, leavers and suicide, but I also think around exclusions. And I think how the council has, both politically and officer leadership, taken to heart this is really important. I know it's important to Deputy Mayor Bramble, but then it has also led into scrutiny work. And I think there is a really strong virtuous circle and link between the sort of governance of the council and its formal executive functions, the scrutiny functions, and then the safeguarding board. And this work is not complete, but it is constantly reinforcing and strengthening practice and then partnership working. And I don't know how many places have that, but I think it's worth really putting that on public record. And you really are, I think, influencing political policy as well as practice, which I think is important, because we have put in further investment in. Final bit is also really strong partners in our Ofsted journey. You know, I think without you at the board, without some of the challenge that we've had and some of that shared learning, we wouldn't be so strong in our Ofsted journey as we work through getting to good and hopefully outstanding in the future. But thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Glanville. So, Susan Masters.
Thank you. I think I'd like to second what the Mayor was saying about it being a fantastic report, very comprehensive, and fantastic depth. What interested me, though, was on page 12, you're referring to the importance of the voice of communities and anti-racist practice, which is fantastic. But then when it comes on to your safeguarding partners, you're only referencing the City of London Corporation and then the police. Do you need to broaden that out to include some of our community groups?
Sorry, Susan, I'm just trying to find the page here. On page 12.
Yeah, page 12, principles. I was just saying, I'm really pleased that anti-racist practice and the voice of communities is sort of singled out as being important. But then when you get into key roles and relationships, it doesn't feel like there's a presence representing our sort of communities.
Okay, so in the report, again, when we talk about kind of our safeguarding partners, our relevant agencies and our named organisations, that's kind of talking about the whole system. So our safeguarding partners are the local authority, the police and the CCG. They are the statutory safeguarding partners. When there was the change in the legislation, it then said that there needed to be relevant agencies who safeguarding partners can name, who then have a duty to kind of cooperate within the safeguarding arrangements, and who would kind of typically make up those organisations who used to be on the old kind of local safeguarding children's board. So Homerton Hospital, East London NHS Foundation Trust, HCVS as well, and other colleagues. So we've taken an approach locally that we don't, so there are actually some regulations that define who is a relevant agency. And we've taken an approach of not going down a route that says, well, actually this one agency is a relevant agency, and this one, because we haven't named them, doesn't have the same requirements. We've taken a very broad brushstroke approach that says, actually, if you're a charity, for example, and you're working with children, you're a relevant agency, and we expect you to cooperate and engage with our safeguarding partnership. So whilst it might not specifically be kind of referenced within there, there is an expectation that our safeguarding partners, relevant agencies and named organisations are a wider collective than maybe what I've been able to describe in this report. But the voluntary and community sectors are absolutely at the heart of what we want to try and achieve, and HCVS have always been a very strong player at both our executive groups and within a range of different subgroups that we host. Previously, our connection was Christine Wellington. We've now got Sakib, who's in many of our forums and contributing fantastically.
And thank you, Rory. And Susan, thank you. So I'll turn now to Councillor Antoinette Bramble.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo some of the sentiments from the Mayor about the thorough report. What I would say, I mean, I know we don't have the same safeguarding arrangements that we have now, but as you know, City and Hackney were the very first safeguarding board to get outstanding by Ofsted until we had the Wood Review that I suppose made references to change that around. But I think that even though the arrangements are different now, the integrity that you and Jim lead on and the way that you detail, as the Mayor said, talking about how you facilitate support and meet with families and echo their voices is critical and is still, in my mind, to those standards. So just want to commend and thank you for that. And, to echo the words of the important work on exclusions, and want to acknowledge the work of Hackney Education elected member as well, including the Mayor, and the schools that are really trying to galvanise around this. I think, but I just reflect on if we're saying enough about disproportionality. Yes, there needs to be work with young people that need to be supported and facilitate and manage their behaviour. Yes, there needs to be facilitation and training around staff that needs to support children managing their behaviour, but none of that addresses disproportionality, which is a different thing. And I don't think, if we don't talk about that enough, I do reflect on, will we tackle exclusions and see the positive change that we need to see? Thank you.
Right, do you want to come back on that, or?
Well, no, I mean, firstly, just thank Mayor Glanville and Councillor Bramble for your very kind words. But, you know, again, the partnership is exactly that. It's the partnership. It's made up of more than Jim and myself. And there's some really, really good committed staff from across a range of organisations who help us do what we do. In respect of the comments Councillor Bramble just made around disproportionality, absolutely agree. You know, exclusions is a symptom of a deeper rooted issue that we need to try and tackle. But, you know, that said, we also know that there is a clear pathway when young people are excluded. They're out of the mainstream school system. Again, there's less eyes on them. And as is reflected in this annual report, you know, with to Sean Ed's circumstance, you can kind of see, and to Sean's case isn't unique. There have been similar circumstances that have arisen in other areas as well. So it kind of just reinforces the message. Yes, you've got to deal with the process, the partnership working that prevents children ending up with less professional eyes on them. But again, you can't do that without looking at some of the structural issues that resulted in children getting there in the first place.
Thank you, Rory. We'll go to the last question. I just, one of my points was actually seeing school exclusion. I didn't see that as a sort of metric that you presented in the report very forcefully, because I think it is a very powerful one, and seeing it over a period of time, I think would be really welcome, actually. So the last question, Susan Fagan Thomas.
Thanks very much, and thanks, Rory, for the presentation, and thanks to Jim as well for the work that has been done within the partnership. And I just want to pick out the work that have been done around young people and their interaction with the police, engaging with the police to get to that point where the police recognizes when our young people, when they're having interaction with our young people, that safeguarding need to come. They need stop and searching. A 14-year-old need to have a safeguarding lens, look at that from a safeguarding lens. And I think that is getting through to the police, and the engagement around that continues. So thank you for the work the partnership is doing with the police.
Thank you for that. I guess that's more of a comment than a question. And my other comment was around the, you know, children were less visible during the pandemic, and some of them remain so. Was a powerful statement as well. But you know, you articulate that in the documentation. But it is a great challenge of trying to understand what it is you don't know and how you try and identify. But you presumably can. The suspicion is high, because if the numbers have gone down, why would that be? I don't know if you just want a final comment about that, Rory, and then we better move on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess COVID has brought a different dimension to safeguarding, undoubtedly. And, you know, I, from my perspective, and I'm pretty sure if Jim was sitting here, he'd be saying exactly the same thing, that actually what we saw during the pandemic was frontline practitioners rising to a immensely difficult challenge and really pulling out of the bag in terms of working in unprecedented and uncharted territory, yet still managing, you know, to keep children as safe as they could, and for that they need absolute congratulation, and that's across the entire partnership. To finish off, I mean, I think for me, you know, regardless of, you know, the time we're living in, or the, you know, whatever year this kind of annual report comes out, you know, I referred to earlier about stubborn challenges, and these are reflected in why the partnership still maintains a firm focus in its priorities about basic practice. Because this is about how do you drive a culture across a system that deals with safeguarding first as an issue. So Councillor Thomas just spoke about the police kind of young people's interface there. We know that's not a unique issue for the police around how professionals, people in positions of trust and authority engage with the young, and particularly the young and vulnerable. But what we have found in some of our previous cases we've looked at, where practitioners haven't thought about a safeguarding response first and foremost, regardless of what their role is, children can suffer. And I'm pretty sure I've spoken at the Health and Wellbeing Board previously about the review we did a while ago into young Chadrak Mbala Mulo, who tragically starved to death in Hackney. And one of the key lessons out of that review was about all practitioners needing to have an absolute laser focus on safeguarding within their practice, whether they're a school crossing patrol person, whether they're a police officer, or whether they're a social worker. This is about a culture and a mindset, and you only get that culture and mindset when leaders talk about safeguarding in their organisations. If they don't, frontline staff aren't going to either. It's kind of a simple lesson, but something that we kind of try and drive continually. And also understanding about context. And the last point, curiosity and challenge. This bit comes back again and again. And I think as a partnership, where we have been strong is that we haven't operated a system that is just going along to get along. Partnership isn't about just being friends. It's about us being able to challenge each other where we see things aren't working as well as they should do. And again, I think from the CHSCP's perspective, I think there's been some good evidence where that's exactly what our leadership, both political and at officer level, does.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rory. So again, thank you for bringing the report to us and for our discussion. Thank you very much, and thanks for all the work you continue to do. So I'm going to move us quickly to our substantive item, which is the Health Watch Hackney strategy document, which we've got. Malcolm, we've got 15 minutes. I'm going to give a last minute or two to Donna just to wrap up the forward plan piece, which I know won't take longer than that. I haven't been notified of any AOBs. So you've got a sort of 5-10 minutes to present the report, and then we'll take some questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Malcolm Alexander, the chair of Health Watch Hackney. First of all, just let me tell you that our executive director, John Williams, is leaving, very sadly, and has taken up a new role with the North East London ICP in Tower Hamlets. So he'll be continuing in the public involvement role, but not in Health Watch. So the strategy, our strategy document is a draft. It's work in progress, and it will eventually go live at our AGM in September. And in that throughout the next few months, we'll be carrying out a consultation exercise on the document. But one of the sort of key things about the document is that we want the work to be much more outcome focused. So that's going to be a sort of a priority for us as we go along. So the document has got 5 main sections: mental health, young people, primary care, St Leonard's Hospital, development, and equality, inclusion, and diversity. Now, one of the primary roles of Health Watch Hackney in terms of its statutory roles is about collecting information from local people about their experiences of health and social care services. And what's really important for us is to enhance that. So we're getting far more information from people about their experiences of care locally, but also to increase the number of volunteers that we work with, because volunteers assist us with one of our important roles, which is called Enter and View, which is our ability to access any health and social care services in the area, to speak to users of those services and to produce reports about how services might be improved. Now, I'm just going to go through the those 5 priority areas and just give you some examples of some of the things that we intend to do. So the first one around mental health services. Our 3-year plan would be to look more closely at acute services, because it gives us the opportunity of going to the East London Foundation Trust in Hackney and to go through all of the wards in the hospital and speak to the patients in those wards and to find out about their experiences, both of accessing services, their experiences within wards, and about discharge arrangements. So it's going to be a very important opportunity for us to learn far more about people's experiences of mental health services locally. So we'll do that through the interim view arrangements, and the plan is, as I said, to go to each ward. And part of it also will be to look at some of the issues around ethnicity, gender and age in relation to detention, and also in relation to the use of restraint, which is something which is a very serious problem. So yeah, hearing the voice of users and looking at the conditions and experiences would be very important for us. Second priority around young people. Number of areas there which we want to look at. One of them is around, we did have a meeting last year on the Ofsted report, and we want to look sort of closely at progress since that Ofsted report. We also want to look at the needs of young carers, and we want to sort of further develop the co-production charter to make sure that younger people are more fully involved in that co-production work. And also to look at some of these big problems about young people, sometimes with mental health problems, being sent out far from the area. And that causes lots of very difficult problems. I think also this sort of transition from young people to adults is an area which is of concern for us. With respect to primary care, we really think that there's a major issue here in terms of the number of GP practices which have closed over recent years, and the fact that one is currently closing or is in the process of closing in Southgate Road, where 6,000 patients have to find a new practice. And really, we think this is a sort of a pretty chaotic system, and we really have to sort of work together to sort of stop practices from closing, make sure there's proper succession planning, and making sure that the vulnerable practices in the area, and there are some practices, there's about 12 practices which are quite vulnerable in terms of their future life and development. And I think, we need to really sort of look closely. We have to stop primary care being disrupted by a system which is sometimes dysfunctional. So that's going to be a major piece of work. But another major piece of work we think will be about PPG development, because some of those PPGs are not really working very well. And for example, where we're in a situation where a practice is at risk, really the PPGs need to better sort of have a much more active role. And I think quite often we're finding that that really the PPGs are not functioning that enables patients to have empowerment and influence in their practices. So that's a very important piece of work. The redevelopment of St Leonard's Hospital, very important. I mean, we're thinking this not just about sort of, rebuilding a health centre, but actually we believe that the land where St Leonard's Hospital is should all be used for health services, for development of health and social care services, for example, new services to be developed, because, we have to look ahead to 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It's not just about, getting pop-up clinics and trying to sort of use a few facilities there, but actually about this is an opportunity to develop really important services for our borough. For example, why are people from this borough sent miles away if they have dementia to have the services miles from their home and their families, where they could, we could have very good development of facilities for people with dementia on the St Leonard's site. Similarly, step-down facilities, we don't have adequate step-down facilities here to enable more effective discharge. So there's some really good opportunities in St Leonard's, and we want to sort of develop the people's plan, and we're currently in the process of trying to employ a worker It's to start some of that work around really comprehensive and effective involvement of local people in the development of the plans for St Leonard's Hospital. And the fifth item is around equality and diversity and inclusion. One of the pieces of work that we sort of started last year was about registration with GP practices. And what we found, as I'm sure you recall, was there was quite serious problems with many practices who were not registering people. For example, people who were migrants, people who didn't have proper sort of paperwork, couldn't produce photo ID, and were being, in some cases, were being denied registration. Well, we've done some really extensive work on that, and that's continuing. But for the future, we want to make sure that every practice in the area is making sure that nobody is denied registration, because that's what the law says, that's what the regulations say. And it shouldn't have been happening. We found some practices sort of saying things like, we don't register asylum seekers or migrants. So that is a very important piece of work for us. We also want to make sure that we've been looking at the websites of GP practices, and we want to make sure that the websites of GP practices are such that everybody is able to access them in the language or in terms of cultural issues as appropriate. But we want to make sure there's proper access for everybody to information, to the resources, and to the services which should be available. We also wanted to make sure that, I mean, there is a big problem about people accessing services if they are migrants and they need secondary care. It's a really serious problem. But also, looking just at, for example, long COVID, we should really be making sure that people who have had COVID and get long COVID are able to get proper services locally. And we're concerned that a number of services are cut off to people. Primary care is fine, A&E is fine, but actually getting into other services can be very difficult. And the other area that we want to look at in more detail is about sickle cell services, because people have been talking to us about some of the problems with the sickle cell services locally. So we want to do much more in-depth work around that. So I think those are the main areas where we'll be looking. There's obviously a few others that I haven't sort of spoken about, but there's some of the key areas that we want to go into in detail as part of our strategy for the next 3 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malcolm. That's great. I've got a couple of hands up. The first actually is Councillor Chris Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I can't see him on the call, but I just wanted to say thank you to John Williams for all his work over the year on this board, on Integrated Care Partnership Board. He's been an assiduous hard worker and partner on health matters across City and Hackney. So please, if he's not here, do pass on his thanks. And my second point is, I think the priority areas are good, apart from, I'm not sure that a focus on the estate and the NHS estate, specifically the St Leonard's site, especially so early on, even before ownership is determined, and certainly the expending of resource drawing up a plan when, I mean, you could work in a bubble and you could design an extraordinary set of health facilities on that site that ultimately might cost, 3 figures of millions of pounds, and it would be a great, I'm sorry, but a great pie in the sky. And actually, that site will almost certainly have to be developed over time in partnership with some very difficult decisions. And I'm not sure it's the right focus for Health Watch, certainly now. I mean, if plans come forward in a year and a half, 2 years' time, then absolutely Health Watch is there to look at them and look at a set out laid of plans. But in terms of drawing up their own ones, I would question whether that's appropriate. Thank you.
Should I respond?
Malcolm, can I just, for time, Mayor Glanville's got a question he also wants to put. Maybe we'll just take them both together, if that's okay.
Fine.
Thanks, Chair Malcolm and Councillor Kennedy. I too want to pay tribute to John. I think he's achieved a huge amount Hackney Health Watch. I think it's part of our continuing health brain drain as all the changes happen around the ICS and people settle into new roles, and we'll add him to the list of people that we've bequeathed to the rest of the East London health system. And I know actually there's a bit of stability that we must make sure we maintain around our health watch. I know there's recommissioning happened recently in Tower Hamlets, and obviously we've got to make sure that Malcolm and the board are supported, and I hope we can work together on that. I don't think we've ever paid tribute to the former chair, Malcolm Rupert Tyson, who we lost this year here. We have a cabinet and other places, but I recognise his part of the journey as well. So a lot of change clearly there. Building on what Councillor Kennedy said, I think the biggest prize we should all be working towards as a health system is St Leonard's ownership. And then once we get hold of that within North East London or Hackney, then we can help think about the co-production around plans. And that's going to be co-production around services. And there are other service changes and obviously other sites in the borough that we'd want to be part of that mix. And then obviously eventual plans. I was going to mention slightly naughtily, there is obviously the Holloway Prison site example of where a good planning document, and that isn't a local plan, but planning document, can ensure that you get genuinely affordable housing and community facilities on a site that is in national ownership. And I think there's some, I've said privately that I think there's some lessons to be learned from there, but I would say that publicly tonight. And then the last bit is I think Health Watch has a crucial role in obviously holding the system to account. And I think we've heard quite a lot of reassurances around access for refugees and migrants and those without documentation in our local health system. I think you powerfully sort of shone a light on some of the challenges, but then it's also how do we use that as learning and make sure it was not an aberration. If it's an aberration, you know, we say so. If it's more systemic, we say so, and then we fix it. Because I think, you know, we've had some very clear statements, haven't we, on GP access and emergency access in the borough, and obviously we continue to fight for a better immigration system that doesn't put the NHS at its front line. But really welcome the report and the strategic direction, and just thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. No, Granville, just before you come in, Malcolm, just a couple of points from me, just quickly. One is to say that the next week, the Hackney Overview and Scrutiny Committee have a meeting on Wednesday evening, which I'm sure you're going to be at, and you know that there's going to be there's a large item on primary care and updating all manner of things, which will touch on quite a few of the points you've already made. Not saying that it's not work that needs to continue, but it'd be just relevant for people to know that they may want to log in on that and hear more details. I think that there are one or two things you pick up on, like the long COVID, care pathway and the frustrations around that. I mean, I think some people do feel frustrated partly because they expect to have an expert opinion in the hospital, but in fact we know that from the evidence there's not a lot that can necessarily be offered, and it's rehabilitation which is the key things that the services need to be invested in to give people as much. Some people need specialist care, of course, because they may have been on ITU for several weeks and have a particular set of problems. You know, things like that we can go into in more detail outside of the meeting, but a point to the primary care update next week will be interesting to people. And last word to you, Malcolm.
Okay, I mean, I think the important thing about St Leonard's is really that public influence doesn't come from, you know, occasional meetings. It comes from a very sort of deep involvement. And, you know, St Leonard's was won many years ago because of large numbers of people in the local area fought for that hospital to be saved. And I think it's really important that, in my experience of public involvement, isn't that you can sort of get things done quickly. It is a slow process of involvement, and it's a process of enabling people to believe they have some real influence and real power in bringing about change. And St Leonard's is an opportunity for us to really involve local people in a development which is owned by local people. So I think that's why we think it's important now. And it's not easy just to do that piece of work with, you know, do it sometime later, but we actually need to involve people now in a very sort of deep and an extensive way. So really, I think we just sort of agree on that basic point, but it's important that we continue to have discussions to sort of see how we can ensure that there is an agreement on how we can influence the decision makers on that site. And I agree absolutely that the transfer of the site to the Homerton Hospital from NHS property is essential. NHS property is really not a very successful organisation in maintaining buildings in the NHS. But we need to make sure that the hospital is in the ownership of our local colleagues, so that we can make sure that development happens in a cohesive and collaborative way.
Yeah, Malcolm, thank you for that. I've just realised, and I'm going to beg forgiveness for one other question to you, and then apologise to Donna for cutting her time even more. That one is about the plans for the consultation on this document. How are you going to do that? Can you just give us a little bit more detail about how that will happen?
I can't at the moment, I'm afraid, because those plans are in the process of being developed.
Well, that was very quick. And we'll obviously need to hear more in various fora later about that. But okay, so we'll think we've noted the strategy. We've commented, and I think we will undertake to promote it as much as possible when the consultation process, as part of that, happens into the future. So I think we would all be quite happy to undertake supporting it in that way. Okay. So thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you very much.
Lovely. So Donna, over to you for a quick comment or two on the forward plan.
And just to say, well, I think Helen did have her hand up. I think she's just taken it down though. I don't know if you noticed that.
Sorry, Donna, I couldn't hear you. It became all distorted then for me.
Helen did have her hand up, but she's taken it down now. Maybe are you?
It was on the previous item, Donna, so I'll pick it up with Malcolm outside the meeting in the interest of time, but thank you.
Okay, all right. I won't take up too much time.
Donna, yes, over to you.
Great. I'm not going to take up too much of your evening. Just wanted to note that anchor institutions as an agenda item was supposed to come to this meeting, but is now being delayed, and it's going to come to the next Health and Wellbeing Board meeting. In your agenda pack, you will see a forward plan, which outlines everything that's coming up in terms of the Health and Wellbeing Board meetings in 2022. Some of those are related to your areas of work, so we might be getting in touch with you soon about that to plan the session. If there's anything that's missing from that, or there's anything you want to add to the forward plan for this year, please get in touch, because it's looking quite busy. Things change a little bit, but yeah, get in touch with me if you need to schedule anything on the forward plan or have any queries about anything that's on it at the minute. But that document's in your agenda pack, and I'm around after this meeting.
You've gone on mute.
So I was just saying I'm available to discuss the forward plan outside of this meeting, and we'll be taking steps to sort of plan the next meeting as well and getting in touch with the relevant people.
Thank you. Helen, apologies to you. I didn't see your hand and virtually appear on my screen, but hopefully you're content. Or did you want to? No, you're content. Fine. Well, we better wrap the meeting up. Thank you, Donna, for that last piece. We are meeting again on the 6th of July. So a slightly longer gap this time, I believe, relating to the election process. But with that, I think it's time to, well, with apologies for borrowing 5 more minutes of your time, wish you good evenings and take care and see you all soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.